Hello, everyone. Welcome to our next in the series of our Afternoon with the Experts. This ongoing series has been going on for about a year and a half, and over that time, we've explored many different opportunities of how the state is serving the children in South Carolina. We've had an in-depth look at the Office of the Child Advocate, the Department of Social Services, and today we're talking about mental health and K-12 education. So I appreciate you spending an hour with us, learning about how we can all come together around the children in South Carolina. And to that end, as I'm sure you know, that April is Child Abuse Prevention Month. I do hope that you know by now or have seen some pinwheels around the state as we talk about Child Abuse Prevention Month. And we know that so often we have looked at things in a way that we wait until the system is broken. And particularly in mental health, if we wait till the crisis happens and everything falls apart, it's way too late. And so we now know from the brain science in the 90s, evidence-based programming, there are a lot of things we can do ahead of time in a prevention way to help children and families be successful. So that's why I'm excited about today in our partnership with the Department of Education. It highlights this innovative partnership we have together to help schools recognize and address the impacts that this pandemic has had on the mental health of children. Utilizing a train the trainer model, every school district is now eligible to send representatives to a nationally established training on adverse childhood experiences, also known as ACEs. This powerful curriculum helps individuals understand and recognize these adverse childhood experiences, both in the children and maybe in themselves, and so that mental health help can be sought after. And so to get us started, I'd like to introduce our moderator for today, Dr. Edward Anderson. He's the Executive Director of On Track Greenville at the United Way of Greenville County, which is a community initiative designed to keep students on track to high school graduation and post-secondary school success. Edward currently also serves on a board of directors for Children's Trust of South Carolina. He's also a co-founder of Bold Leadership, which focused on uplifting the profession of education, specifically supporting African-American male educators. He currently holds an elementary and secondary endorsement in the principalship, a master's degree in curriculum and instruction, and a doctoral degree in educational leadership and technology. Edward, I'll turn it over to you to introduce our panelists.
Fantastic. Thank you all for being here today. Thank you for the introduction, Sue. I now have the pleasure of introducing our panelists from the South Carolina Department of Education. I hope that you are as excited as I am to have these amazing experts on this call that are working on behalf of the children in our state. So first up, I have Dr. Sabrina Moore. Dr. Sabrina B. Moore is currently the Director of the Office of Student Intervention Services at the South Carolina Department of Education, where she oversees various programs designed to ensure that school administrators and educators have access to information, training, and other resources that students need to succeed. Among the initiatives managed by staff in Dr. Moore's office are the 21st Century Community Learning Centers, dropout prevention, family and community engagement, student behavioral health, and school climate and culture. A graduate of Columbia College and Clemson University, where she earned her Ph.D. in educational leadership, Dr. Moore has over 30 years of service in public education. Welcome, Dr. Moore. And next we have Suzanne Snyder. Suzanne Snyder is a licensed professional counselor with over 20 years in the mental health field, currently works at the South Carolina Department of Education as the mental health program manager. In this role, Ms. Snyder, who specializes in depression, anxiety, and life issues with an emphasis on working with adolescents, young adults, and the LGBTQ+ community, will be responsible for helping districts integrate mental health in schools and respond to the mental health needs of students and staff more effectively. She currently has a private practice in Columbia, South Carolina, where her background includes working in the HIV/AIDS community, specializing in transgender healthcare, child and adolescent services at Columbia Area Mental Health as the Baby Net Mental Health Coordinator, and vocational rehabilitation career services as the rehabilitation counselor. She has a Master of Arts in Counselor Education from the Lenore Ryan University in Hickory, North Carolina. Welcome, Ms. Snyder. As you can see, the two guests that we have today are amazing experts in the field of education and mental health. And I am excited about this conversation. I'm eager. Thank you for those of you that submitted some questions ahead of time. That was great. We're going to continue to fill some questions along the way as well. So please, audience members, please insert your questions in the Q&A box when you have some, and we'll have some time as we navigate through this conversation to address some of those questions. So thank you again. All right, we're gonna get going. Question number one. All right, so in my work as a former middle school principal and even in my current role, I understood and saw the reality of that invisible backpack that we talk about that students bring in day to day. I would love to hear your thoughts. South Carolina, we live in a state where 20% of the children live in poverty. We know that increases their risk of multiple health, social, and educational problems. And we also live in a state where 62% of adults report an adverse childhood experience. April is Child Abuse Prevention Month. We know that ACEs impact children. So could you please provide insight into how this impacts children across the state of South Carolina?
I'll start. And first, thank you for the invitation. Suzanne and I are excited to be here. And so when we talk about ACEs and the impact on education, we recognize that children that experience ACEs trauma, it definitely affects their behavior, and then it affects their school performance. What we see is that students who have experienced trauma, and we know that children are still experiencing trauma even from the pandemic and all the community violence. So a lot of things are going on in the world right now. And so we know that we encourage educators to look on the lookout for the impacts on their behavior. They might become anxious. They might become more withdrawn. I was working with a student recently, and she talked about how isolated she felt and how that extreme sense of isolation actually impacted her mental health. So she ended up having to see a counselor in order to rein it back in. So we know that on that behavior side, that ACEs is critically important for us to address and to be aware of. But we also know that the impact on students' academic performance, on their school attendance. So we know that if students are struggling, their GPAs might be lower, they might contemplate dropping out of school, they might, again, we talk about going back to behavior because behavior does affect attendance. They might start acting out in class. They just might lose focus. They might start daydreaming and wandering. And so we're excited about this partnership with Children's Trust because we recognize that we have to train educators and others, help them to become more aware about ACEs and the impact on students' academic performance as well as their behavior. Suzanne, you want to add anything to that? Suzanne, you're on mute.
You're muted, Suzanne.
Sorry about that. Just talking away. I guess everything you said, Sabrina, and more, I guess I would add, just taking into account that if you're looking at ACEs, what it does to children's development along with the pandemic, which is going to affect their academic performance. And we also know that academic performance can affect mental wellness, as well as mental wellness can affect academic performance, and also relationships. So relationships with their peers, relationship with their teachers, with their parents. So that's what I would add.
Thank you both. One of the things that I know your office is very aware of, and many of you on the call, to your point, is that academics, behavior, and course performance are the three leading indicators of success for students. But the piece that often goes unrecognized within that is if we don't have a foundation of strong social emotional awareness, if we don't have a strong sense of positive relationships with peers and adults, and the climate and culture isn't well, and people aren't recognizing when children have symptoms and able to really intervene, then we can innately impact A, B's, and C's as well, which will then equate to lack of success for students. So thank you for touching on that and giving us the specifics of how this is impacting the students across South Carolina. And what's really interesting about it as well is that we're not talking about socioeconomics here. We're talking about something that impacts all students. So as we move into the next question, this one really centers around what works. What are the solutions? I mean, there's a lot of programs and products out there, but what resources have been added to schools in the last 5 to 10 years that have been successful? For example, additional mental health support, to really support mental health for children?
Okay, so I'm gonna take that question, I think, and then Sabrina, you can chime in at any time. So I have been with the Department of Education since August. However, in my introduction, Dr. Anderson mentioned that I have over 20 years of experience in the mental health field. So over the last 5 to 10 years, I have watched the mental health field really improve. So along with schools implementing, hiring more school-based mental health therapists, encouraging families to participate in school and worried about social emotional mental health issues, and also insurance too. A lot of 10 years prior, it was more kind of reactive, like you had to, it was not as easy to get mental health services. Now it's preventative. It's easier to get it through insurance. You have the school-based mental health therapist in the schools. You have behavioral interventionists in the schools. The teachers are being trained in trauma-informed care and how to handle specifically children that may have multiple ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and just the support staff. So you have from the top bottom, superintendents, principals, office staff, bus drivers, teachers, they're all being trained in mental health.
And so can I add to that, Dr. Anderson? Because I think the other thing that has changed, so I came to the department, wow, almost 20 years ago. And so what I have seen even in that time, but probably within the past 10 years really, is this whole notion that people have mental health challenges. So that whole notion of destigmatizing, and I think that's one of the benefits of having school-based clinicians in the schools, because the notion there is that if it's a part of the norm, if it's effectively integrated, mental health services are effectively integrated within the day-to-day operations of the school, you are going to help to destigmatize that to a certain degree. So I've seen that. I've also seen that it's okay. I mean, we know that mental health is addressed in the state standards, okay? So from K to 12th grade, mental health is supposed to be taught, addressed in state standards. But I've also seen kind of this attitude, and we do restorative practices training, and I think we know that we have shifted to saying, what happened to this child? We have made that shift in a lot of arenas. We're going to, what's wrong with you, boy? Okay, what's wrong with you, girl? Okay, it's like, what really has happened to this child? And then how can we provide support to this child based on his or her experiences? So I've seen that shift as well.
Thank you both so much. Dr. Moore, that question has revolutionized and transformed the way I do my work. I can recall experiences that I've had and encounters that I had as a teacher in schools and being a disciplinarian and really not asking the right question. And it was, what's wrong with this child? What's wrong with them? Why are they acting this way? And I never was curious enough to say what happened to them. Mm-hmm. Right. Being introduced to trauma-informed practices and understanding adverse childhood experiences and so forth have really led me to asking the right questions. And then there's not a dead end. It's not wrong with this person. It does, you're right. It becomes a happen, let me get to an answer. And now there's a solution or a specific challenge that may be presenting itself in the classroom or at home and so forth. So thank you again, both, for that insight. The next question really surrounds funding and the pandemic. So everyone knows there's all these magical funds everywhere, right? Like this person got funds and the city's getting funds and this nonprofit and the State Department. And then people are, kind of know, what's happening with some of it. But how is the American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA, and elementary and secondary school emergency funds allowing South Carolina Department of Education to lead and innovate in supporting the mental health of children in South Carolina?
So probably the biggest thing is Suzanne Snyder. As I said, I've been here for 20 years. And I have not ever known, I could be wrong, but I've never known that the department had a program manager dedicated to assisting schools and students and staff in mental health issues. So hats off to our state superintendent, Motley Spearman, of course, for making mental health just a priority. So that's one thing. I will also say that, Dr. Anderson, you talked about social emotional learning. To that degree, funds have also been set aside to get a full-time social emotional learning manager in Sarah Gams. Again, huge. And I think sometimes we want to say that that's one and the same. No, those are two distinctly different positions that are so needed in schools. So that's one way that the department is using its funds. Schools, Suzanne has already I guess, acknowledge that during the past several years, we've seen even the state legislators have provided additional funds for school-based mental health. And so to couple that, the department is also looking for ways, and we got some plans to actually provide districts with funds to hire additional support staff. It's the mental health support staff. So it's not necessarily the licensed counselor or the mental health clinician, but I think you referenced it earlier. There might need to be social workers. There might need to be additional behavior interventionists. There might need to be additional school counselors to really provide a more solid foundation for student mental wellness and behavioral health. So we're excited about that. And then training. I hope that schools and districts have already seen the increase in the amount of training that's available. And Suzanne, I am going to say, because I think it's important, and it's free training. I said to some districts yesterday, and some of the other staff members said to districts this morning, that we provide free training as a result of ESSER dollars and things like that. And so I just know that mental health and advancing mental health and strengthening mental health is critically important. The partnership that we have with Children's Trust, that Children's Trust has taken the lead in training individuals from every district in the state who wants it in ACEs. So wow, can you imagine that? Because we know that we have to get educators and administrators and everybody fully trained in this ACEs awareness in order to really benefit students in a more holistic manner. And then finally, we'll be adding some additional resources going directly to districts and brochures and pamphlets. And I'm excited about the training opportunities. So when I say I'm excited, that means I'm excited about Suzanne.
Well, thank you. And also, along with the free training, I do my best to make sure that everybody can get professional development renewal credits. So, you know, it's worth your time. Not that the training's not worth your time, but, you know, getting credit for that.
Wow, what a very robust answer for how funding is being used. Thank you. Thank you, Suzanne, for the work that you are doing and will continue to do. That you're right, that is quite an investment in our most precious resource, our kids. And I applaud, to your point, Molly Spearman and Sue for her efforts in terms of the training that Children's Trust does as well around ACEs. It's transformative. So again, thank you so much for that robust answer around funding.
Hey, Dr. Anderson, can I say one other thing? And
absolutely.
Then, and you kind of might have to say, Sabrina, but I do think the other piece of that puzzle that is worthy of mentioning is that the training is not just for teachers and administrators. I think that's so important. The trainings are open to all of the support staff, the administrative support staff, to the bus drivers, to the custodial staff, to the food and nutrition staff, because we know that in order to be most effective, we need to ensure as much as we can that everybody associated with that child in a given day is on the same page. And so understanding how ACEs affect students, understanding how to deal with certain issues that students might have. I think those things are critically important.
Thank you so much for adding that. And partnerships are critically important. So I'm glad you mentioned that as well, because while all the school staff and staff that's associated in the school ecosystem are getting trained, our students and our families are also coming in contact with community centers and other nonprofits and so forth throughout the day. So those providers are important as well to having a trauma-informed or an approach to really understand what our kids' challenges may be and how to mitigate some of those challenges in those spaces. So you're right, these partnerships are key. And it's not just the school ecosystem that's responsible for our kids, but it's the whole community that's responsible for our kids. So you're right, continue to have and ensure that everyone feels a piece of this puzzle, because we all are. Thank you. So we're going to take a moment to take some few questions from some questions that were submitted ahead of time by audience members. The first question, what we know in South Carolina is that 57% of parents and caregivers reported that their current level of stress and anxiety, along with other lack of social determinants, is much higher due to the pandemic. So what are some strategies to work with youth that have challenging behavioral issues? For instance, how do we help students deal with anxiety?
So I'm glad I had that question ahead of time so I could make sure that I can give you the best answer I can. And if there's something that they ask and we don't know the answer, I'll be more than happy to get it and you can pass it out to everybody. So just like you were talking, Dr. Anderson, about trauma-informed practices, if a child has anxiety or challenging behavioral issues, first, find out what is going on with the child. Asking what happened, is everything okay? How can I help you? What do you need right now? Then if this is the teacher in the classroom, or if it's a parent, checking around with other people that are involved with the child. Maybe there's support staff at school. Maybe it's the bus driver. I just did some a training with bus drivers and how critical they are, because they see the child, first thing in the morning and then last thing of the day. So, they get to know that child in a little bit different way than maybe a teacher would or a counselor would. So, just seeing if you're using some social emotional learning strategies, even at home. It could be, do they need to just take a break for a minute? Do you need to implement some calming techniques? If they're having anxiety and you're noticing that it's affecting them at school, at home, maybe the extracurricular activities, then it would be important to, I would say, first start with the pediatrician. Go start with them, see kind of what you're looking at. And then if the school offers counseling, then talk with the teacher, talk with the school counselor so that they can figure out how to go, what is the best route for that child. School-based mental health services, private. The key is for everybody to work in a team. Mental health, schools have mental health teams, but that just doesn't include everybody in the school. You've got to bring the parent in, the pediatrician, even maybe if they're involved in church or a after school program. So, getting everybody together and treating that whole child.
Ms. Snyder, Dr. Moore, do you have any additional responses?
I think Suzanne did a good job with summing that up.
I think so as well. Thank you, Ms. Snyder. All right, so our next question from the audience is, what are the standards of mental health support for the K-12 age group? And how are local schools and districts held accountable to provide mental health supports for students?
So and they were revised in 2017, but South Carolina has standards for health and safety education, okay? And so mental health standards includes emotional, psychological, and social well-being. And as schools and districts are responsible for implementing all of the standards, that would be the expectation, that here are the standards, you're supposed to teach the standards, and we expect that they do. So that would be the accountability measure, as with all of the standards for math and English and social studies, is to utilize the South Carolina standards for health and safety education.
Thank you. I do have a follow-up question, personally, for the both of you. So as a school level administrator, I can remember to engage, bus drivers, for example. That was a great example of someone who definitely needs to be connected to that child and supportive of that child. Have you seen any positive efforts or initiatives or stories of that partnership working?
So Suzanne, I'll start, but I think you can definitely kind of follow up with that. And I think the example that you gave is like the bus drivers. And so we understood within the department, we have, of course, inter-office meetings. And we were talking about the training that we provide, again, free of charge. And our goal is to train all educators and support staff. And the director of school transportation said, hey, I think our bus drivers are having issues with de-escalation strategies. I think that was the thing. Like they needed some strategies. And so as a result of that conversation, Suzanne was asked to provide training for bus drivers. Now, so I'm going to say absolutely yes. I'll tell you definitely with school counselors. I mean, if we talk about just the number of school counselors who take advantage of training that's provided by the department, and then the other group that I'll mention would be school nurses. A lot of times we don't think, but school nurses are definitely tasked with the health of students. Well, we know sometimes physical health is related to mental health. And so same thing there. We know that we've had effective partnerships with staff beyond administrators and educators.
Thank you so much. We have 2 more audience questions that we'll take before we go back to some of our pre-planned questions. One, you touched on this a little bit. You said for those that utilize the training, someone is interested in, do you know or keep up with how much of the training is being utilized by school staff other than counselors or teachers?
So in my trainings, I do set up the registration so I know who is attending and I know their role. And I ask them to put their role in there. So I don't know if I can specifically give you a percentage, but there is a really robust mix of staff attending. Librarians, behavioral interventionists, assistant teachers, administrators, superintendents and principals, school-based mental health therapists, teachers, had some school bus drivers. I think and school nurses, they usually attend. And I think on a couple, I'd have to double check how many, but I know school resource officers have attended.
Thank you, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and so we actually provide training for school resource officers in connection with other organizations. I will also say in our partnership with Department of Mental Health, we provide suicide prevention and awareness training, and they've been doing that for well over a year, free of charge. Again, it's a real course. And so interestingly enough, a number of administrative assistants and specialists participate in that training. And you go, wow, that's interesting, because who's sometimes the first kid that the student sees in the morning? It's those individuals at the desk. So it's always nice to see, it's nice to kind of see how that expands. With our partnership with SLED, that's where some of that school resource officer training comes in. So again, I think we're trying to reach the full gamut. I'm sure there's much work to be done, but I know the opportunity is there.
Thank you all so much for answering those questions from our audience members. We will have one more opportunity to answer some questions from the audience. So please continue to ask those questions and we'll try to get to them at our next checkpoint. All right, so my next question for you is, what has been done in legislative groups to support mental health in the K through 12 school system? And what should we look for in the future?
Okay, so I'll touch on this and then if Sabrina has anything to add. So I checked with our legislative liaison, and if y'all have heard in the news lately, Governor McMaster asked Director Kerr at the Department of Health and Human Services to conduct a study looking at school-based mental health services. And he did this during his State of the State speech in January. So the Department of Education and Department of Health and Human Services worked together and sent out a survey to all the school districts. So I think they're still putting that together. And then Director Kerr is going to share the results with Governor McMaster, and that will then go to the General Assembly and we will figure out what goes from there. But I mean, I think, without being able to tell you what, it's a lot of exciting things going to happen around school-based mental health.
Okay.
That's very helpful. I mean, I think it creates some optimism about the future, to your point, of mental health services for our students in our schools. I had that actual question earlier about your position and the commitment, the continued long-term commitment from the state and from our legislators about it. So it's really good to hear that process is underway.
And kudos to Governor McMaster and his team and being really worried, concerned, and wanting to improve school-based mental health services for children.
Thank you. All right, so our next question is, how are school districts coordinating services and working together to support mental health in children across the state? What is the community's role in mitigating issues and partnerships with local schools? And so that's literally my whole job. I think Dr. Moore, as well, as I read your bio and did some research about you as well, that's what you do. So I would love to hear what you've seen across the state, efforts being done to coordinate those interventions around mental health.
Okay, so Suzanne, let me start with the community piece first, and then Suzanne is going to really, because I love that notion of what the panel is doing. So with the community piece, the community is vitally important. And so what can the community do? Community leaders need to be trained in ACEs, because you got to understand the issues surrounding students. You got to be trained in mental health strategies and coping strategies. You have to be trained in suicide prevention and awareness. Because that's how we help schools. Schools need assistance. Students are in school a considerable portion of their day, but they are also involved in organizations outside of school. And so again, I think it goes back to, if everybody is trying to sing off the same page, then I think we'll be successful in that. So I want to go back, because I neglected to say this. So when we talk about the ESSER dollars, like what are we doing with the America Rescue Plan dollars? A part of those funds were also used to fund organizations such as NAMI, okay? NAMI does Preventing the Silence for educators, but they do it for families and they do it for students. So again, you're kind of bringing in that whole, everybody who impacts a child is critically important. Suzanne and I were talking, I think yesterday or the day before, like I was so pleased that the Department of Mental Health has suicide prevention and awareness training for clergy. It's like, how do you train your clergy to address the mental health and the needs of students? Wow. So we know how important faith-based community is. Then if that's one of the focal points in our society, you're hoping that they are trained as well. So whether or not a student is at school or in the community organization or is at church on the weekend, that is recognize that we are all concerned about their mental and emotional well-being. And then finally, then Suzanne, I'll stop. But then, because we also have this partnership with Federation of Families as a part of ARP funds. And the same thing there is that I love that Federation of Family is corralling, and I'm going to use that word, is corralling families and students and communities to wrap their arms and wrap around services for students and families. And so community is vitally important, but we all have to be trained and understand the significance of the issues.
And so I'll touch on the first question about, or the first part of the question about how are school districts coordinating services and working together. So since I started, I've been out there getting to know people virtually, in person, whatever it takes. And with one of the things that I came up with Governor McMaster's charge of looking at school-based mental health services, is I said, okay, so let's see what all the districts are doing. So I started a panel, and the first one was March the 30th. And what I'm doing is getting different school districts together and doing a panel discussion virtually so that each district can showcase what they're doing with their mental health services. And then we have another one coming up May the 4th. So just, letting everybody know, what's Charleston doing? What's Colleton County doing? A school like Chester, or a school district like Chesterfield could say, well, we don't know how to start mental health services. We can't do that. Yeah, you can, because you can pick and choose from these different districts and the information that you get from them. And then one of the exciting things that it's doing is it's really introducing everybody. So they may not know each other, because again, maybe working in silos, or everybody's so busy they don't have time to coordinate and to create those relationships.
That's very interesting, and I think it is a piece of the puzzle that has been missing. As I talk about those puzzle pieces again, we held a youth violence event recently, and at the end of the session, one of the parents said, "This is all great. I'm an ambassador for my neighborhood, and I now I have to take all this back to the folks that really need it." And so bringing all the folks together was great, but she was like, "Now what?" And so when I think about that, now what, I see the South Carolina Department of Education being that hub, the expertise. So when you go out, you can not only answer those questions, but I'm assuming that there's going to be, I don't know, recordings or documents developed, frequently asked questions, those kind of things available for people in individual districts to reach out to, and kind of have a menu of support, a store of offerings, as opposed to not even knowing what questions to ask. So I love that. Being proactive and getting that information, because I do, and people are saying that, okay, I'm the one out here on the ground, where is it? How can I get it in one place? So I love that you're bringing the pieces together into one place so that you can house that information.
Yeah, and one of the goals is for a school to be able to say, what do I need? Or school district to say, what do I need to start or have a school-based mental health program? And yes, the panels are recorded.
Thank you. All right, we're going to pause for a second because we have a few more questions from our attendees. So the first question is, if you have a student that says they would like to speak to someone about their mental health, or are requesting to speak to a therapist or counselor on a regular basis to maintain positive mental health, can and should schools accommodate that child?
You want me to answer that, Sabrina?
Yes.
So of course it's going to depend on the school, but I would say yes. Again, I am more, if you can check with the child's physician first, but using that team in the school, the mental health team, to make that decision. And, if you're talking about they're asking to speak, maybe they're going to the nurse and saying their stomach hurts every day. Or maybe they are going to the school counselor and saying, I'm having anxiety, or they're even telling their parent and their parents telling their teacher, and they don't know exactly how to do it. The school should have some type of information or guidance or referral system to help that child.
And Suzanne, and I would go, don't overlook, and you just said it, like the referral. So it could be that the school is based on their assessment, right? And based on their staffing, that they might refer that student to someplace else, to another type of service. So don't negate that.
So am I accurate in kind of saying that if a school has that team in place and leadership that's willing to answer the call, essentially, then yes. But if I'm a teacher and I encounter that student who regularly asks, and I know that team is not established, I know leadership is not yet on that path, do I not? That's just that I'm throwing that out there just as from what I'm hearing.
You know, not that I want to get like thousands of calls. However, I would be more than happy to help that teacher or assist that teacher in what are the steps. Or if the teacher I would maybe suggest the teacher go to administration and say, you know, I've got this child and they're reaching out for help. What do you know? What do we have in our district? I've heard about this. I've heard about that.
That's good. Thank you so much. Our next question from our attendees is, do you think it would be important to helpful to incorporate ACEs or mental health? Actually, that question's been asked. I apologize. It's about SROs again. It seems there's been about 3 questions about SROs at this point, very similar, but I feel as though everyone is interested in the SRO's physical presence and their training and understanding kids. And I've had an SRO in a building as a principal, so I get it. So if you have any more insights about SROs that you'd like to share, please insert those throughout the remainder of this conversation. But there are some questions continuing to pop up about SROs.
Okay, so Dr. Anderson, so I would say again, all of the training that we offer is available to SROs. So every from mental health first aid to de-escalation strategies to restorative practices to how to work with kids. I mean, whatever training that we offer is available for all school staff. This is so interesting. We just did a little aside here, but I think it's important because I think it addressed the behavior and mental health needs of students. Again, with ESSER dollars, we are providing gang culture and trends awareness training. And we know you got to figure out why kids are in gangs and what's the pull there. So you got to understand the needs there. Got a great trainer, again, free for everybody. The last, and it's approved by the Criminal Justice Academy. So we're providing that training. And someone asked, wow, SROs need this, please send them, you know. And so we've had a number of SROs to participate, not only in that gang awareness training, but the point is any training that we offer, SROs can participate in.
Thank you. This next question is a technical question, and then the follow-up question is more for Suzanne. So is there a standard ratio for determining how many mental health counselors are needed within a school? For instance, we know the 250-to-1 ratio with school counselors, but is there such a ratio for mental health counselors as well?
Go ahead, Suzanne, because we know the answer to
Yeah. Gosh, it would be wonderful if it was 1 to 30. However, so Mark Wiest at the University of South Carolina has determined that it would be most beneficial to have 1 school-based mental health therapist for every 2 schools. And you know, if you look at that, if you're looking at MTSS or multi-tiered support or systems of support, so a mental health counselor, a licensed therapist that is doing intensive therapy would only be seeing maybe 25 to 30 kids. However, there's things that pop up like crisis, intervention, and meetings and groups, and even like staff that may have to do with staff. So I don't even want to know what the ratio is in South Carolina, but it's probably, we would hope to be 1 in 250.
Yeah, because that's the national standard for, so that's the goal.
I know that's a really good question. I know when you're in a school building and you see all the needs and it just feels so overwhelming. Again, in my experience, we were the first school in Greenville County to have 2 on-site mental health counselors that were full-time because of the vast needs of the school I serve. They would typically hold a caseload of around 50 students, but also they would report to me, we could serve so many more. And we are kind of on a tier 1 school-wide level, probably providing more supports, but deeply managing 50, but it was hard. Very difficult. So thank you for providing more insight on that specific question. And as I said, that next question was about going back to Governor McMaster and his process with Dr. Kerr. What is he exactly looking at? Do you know some of those metrics? Is he looking at improvement, quality, access for families?
Sabrina, I don't know if you want me to answer that. I mean, all of those. I mean, it is, a review, like who's providing the services, who needs the services, how can we make sure that every child can be served without cost? Because I noticed that somebody put in there, if you do this, the school will be liable to reimburse DMH, and that's got a lot of moving parts in it. So it's not really something I can get into except for I know the governor's goal and Director Kerr's goal is to make mental health services, whether it's tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, tier 1 reaching the whole school, tier 2, maybe a group setting, tier 3 individual, that all kids would have access to what they need.
Thank you. So we have one more question from our attendees, and then we're going to close out with our final 2 questions. So this one is around student voice. But do schools or the Department of Education make intentional efforts to listen to children, what they believe they need in order to thrive?
So, okay, I'm good for saying that I am hoping that, and I do believe that schools and districts listen to their students. I think there are a lot of surveys. I mean, we know there's a parent survey that goes out every year, and there's a safety component of that, and then there's a student view component of that. And so you get those results from that survey, and I think every district and every school has survey results, and you should be able to see what the students say about, do they feel safe at school? Do they feel like they have enough support at school? So I think you get support that way. At the department, what we are striving to do now, so this is so timely, is to be a vehicle where students can really, so we hear the students, so that we are directly sharing information with them. And we started last year when we hosted a statewide anti-bullying summit for classes of students. And we asked teachers to register their classes. And we had over 10,000 students to participate in that forum. And they were able to put in questions to the presenters, and the presenters did their best to answer those questions. Similarly, we're working on a forum to help students address their own mental health needs, to kind of do an assessment of themselves. The format we're still working on, but ideally it's the same thing. It's like educators, bring your students virtually to this arena, and they'll have an opportunity to explore questions, ask questions, and to receive answers from those questions. And so we're hoping again that we have thousands of students, because we believe that's a way to hear them. so that they'll feel like somebody is listening, somebody is caring about them, and that the department is, yes, reaching, administrators and teachers and other support staff, but we really are trying to do a better job in going directly to students. And so we'll just be on the lookout for additional information about that, but we know that's going to happen.
Thank you so much, Dr. Moore. And I think that goes back to those partnerships as well. There's so many organizations that are collecting data around students as well, especially those that work most directly with students and youth. For example, within our organization, we do a student survey every year as well around social emotional learning, anyone directly involved in the programs that we fund. And then we share that data with the district so they can make decisions about where and how they fund and how they do programming and so forth. So again, I think those partnerships are key too. Thank you so much. Few more questions. Are there grants available for private therapists to aid in providing mental health services or assistance to schools?
So I'm not sure of any grants. What I would say is be on the lookout for opportunities for private providers to be able to work with this in the schools if they're interested. Sabrina may know of some grants, but there's all of this information and decisions about school-based mental health services are on the horizon. So I would say just keep looking.
Okay. And I'm not aware of any grants for private therapists.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, that's one of those areas. I mean, that's one of those areas that we as a community, I guess, will continue to evolve. And I know there are private funders, especially in the upstate, that have made some intentional investments in community partners to provide some of that those mental health services as well. So I know the conversation's happening, but again. So another question is, how do schools identify mental health needs as an alternative to only disciplining students when they have behavioral challenges?
So Suzanne, I will start. I think it still goes back to training. And Dr. Anderson, I think it's going to go back to when you said you made that shift to like, what's wrong with you? To what happened? And so if we understand why a student is behaving the way he or she is behaving, then that might tailor the disciplinary outcomes. We were excited that a lot of the zero tolerance policies have kind of gone by the wayside. We were excited that, and this has been a couple of years, and we're actually working on this now, that the department put out a kind of a matrix of here's some interventions for student behavior instead of suspending and expulsions. Here are some intervention strategies that we would encourage you to try. Now, another layer of that came on recently, and we're exploring that now, is then to add the student voice to that. When we're talking about student voice, so we're saying, here's the intervention that educators can use, but here's some interventions that students might be able to use. And then let's have a conversation. I know a lot of times people have said when we do restorative practices training that restorative practices is just doesn't hold students accountable and they don't get to be disciplined and you just want to play nice. No, you want relationships. A former teacher of the year, and y'all, I apologize because I forgot his name, but he said he could not discipline students until he had a relationship with them, right? And that quote stuck with me because I might receive it better if I feel like you care about me. I might receive it better if you know who I am. And so that's what I would say that schools are working towards. So that's not just jump to the discipline because somebody spoke out of turn or because somebody did something. Let's take the time to figure out what really happened. And I'll say this other piece, and I know some schools are doing it, is to allow the students to be involved in the consequences. I mean, that's a scary thought, but we talk about paradigm shifts, but that might be something worthy of exploring. And Suzanne, I'm done.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to also the trauma-informed practices. And I'll tell a really quick story about this. What came from a training that I think it was a Title I training that the department did. And the presenter said a teacher went through trauma-informed training, and he said that it really changed his whole approach to dealing with his kids. He said he had a kid in there that just would, just do whatever to get attention. And he put a sticky note on his head and it said something like, "I hate this class." And he said, typically before he did the trauma-informed training, he would have said, "You're out of here. Go to the principal. I'm not dealing with you today. You're gone." He shifted, like Sabrina said, that paradigm change. He goes, "Oh," so he took out stickies, gave them to every student, had them write what they were thinking. And he said from that moment on, he built these relationships with kids that said, "I don't think Mr. Burns likes me. I wish I could be outside. I'm hungry. I need clothes." I mean, it was just all this stuff. So that story really meant something to me. And I think it's a huge lesson and a telltale sign.
And it's really powerful. I mean, it's to both of your points, based. And I think I heard this for the first time through Michael Shirley, who did ACEs training for me. But I've heard it numerous times since then. A dysregulated adult cannot regulate a dysregulated child. Mm. So we have to check our own behavior and where we are in the moment. And that's as a parent too. I have 2 boys and they are wild. I have to check myself even when I discipline. So it's become personal, and it just becomes the way you do life in terms of discipline. And I know there's a book called Conscious Discipline that's very popular in schools as well, that really asks educators and people that work with kids to really, hold on, check yourself first. Are you in a space to really be able to consequence, discipline? Discipline is to teach, right? Are you really in a place to teach a child about whatever has occurred? So again, thank you for those insights. And I'll leave you with one more question before we turn it back over to Sue to close us out. And that is, what do we need to do at the State Department of Education to mandate mass screenings for social emotional issues with students?
To mandate
mass screenings for social emotional issues.
Honestly, I'm not sure that is a State Department of Education's in our purview. That might be a state board of regulation, that might take legislation. So I'm going to say, Suzanne, on behalf of both of us, I don't know if we can answer that question.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you.
That was food for my soul and for what I do. And so thank you so much. I'm going to pass it back over to Sue.
Sure, thank you. And I will answer, Dr. Moore, that we have had that question to us about ACEs. As you know, we do these ACE trainings and people say we should do mass ACE scoring so that people know what they got, right? But then what do you do with that information? And an ACE score is just a point in time. So I would say the same thing about social emotional screening and mass screening. We know that being self-aware and getting that training up front is really important. But what are you going to do with that information if you know somebody's ACE score or somebody's social emotional screening? The better thing to do is to be equipped to be self-regulated so that you can be your best self and help those who are in need of help. So at first it sounds like a good idea. Well, we'll just, screen everybody. But there are consequences, sometimes unintended consequences that we need to be mindful of. And with that, I will close us out. Thank you so much, Dr. Anderson, for your thoughtful conversations and the wonderful conversation. Thank you so much, Dr. Moore and Suzanne Snyder, for being with us today and sharing all that you have going on. Like you, we've been doing this work for a number of years, and we have seen the shift in how we look at kids and families. It's no longer that bad child or those bad parents, but it's really about the children and the families and what they're all experiencing in the community. You've heard me say this before, kids do well when families do well, and families do well when they live in communities that support them. And so it really is about all of us being in community together, working together for the children so that they can grow up to be productive adults. And with that, I say thank you all so much for attending, for being with us today, for your thoughtful conversations in the chat box and the Q&A, and your time today. And I'm really looking forward to our continued partnership with the Department of Ed and the trainings we're doing across the state, so we can get more people trained on all of this, even down to the janitor and the bus driver, people, like you say, who you don't think really interacts with the kids, but in fact, they interact with them all day, every day. So it's important that everybody gets the training. And as our guest noted today, as I mentioned, this work is not possible without support from people like you on this call and your friends and those in the community. So if you are so compelled, I urge you to go to our website, sign up for our newsletter, come to our next event or training, our next afternoon with the experts. Mimi has dropped in the chat box our website. You can also donate $10, $20, $25. We then give that back out into the community so we can do more trainings and help more kids and more teachers across South Carolina. Thank you all for being here and for all your words of wisdom.